went on a cocaine binge for a few months. Okay.
Wait a sec. Mike the vegan, are you really such an idiot? You're going to compare eggs to cocaine? Is that really what you're doing in this video? Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be taking a look at a video by Mike the vegan. Harvard student ate 720 eggs in 30 days and his cholesterol dropped. So before I even open this, I know what it's about. It's about Nick Norwitz's recent video. He's the Harvard student talking about his self-experimentation. So let's see what Mike has to say.
Hey, it's Mike here, and today my response to this story: Harvard student eats 720 eggs in a month and his cholesterol drops.
I ate 1 egg per hour, every hour for a whole month.
Now, this has commenters like Carnivore Dr. Ken Berry saying, quote, "Eggs are a heart-healthy food for all humans. Eat as many as you want," and others using...
So the reason that Dr. Berry is saying that is not so much about this particular experiment. It's because humans have been eating eggs for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, and humans probably evolved eating some eggs. So there's no reason that eggs wouldn't be a heart-healthy food, right? That's the null hypothesis: is the foods that an animal has evolved to eat are going to be healthy for that animal.
This as proof that their high cholesterol, high meat diet is perfectly healthy, but immediately recognizing the face.
So proof is a tough word. In any given individual, in any given human system, there's a lot of things going on. But again, we're looking for a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the foods that an animal, in this case the human animal, has evolved to eat are going to be healthy for that animal.
Of the dude in the articles, I know that there's much more going on with this story, and that really this is misleading for 99.9% of people that are going to be watching these videos, and of course going, cholesterol's great, eat as much eggs as they want. And so we're going to talk about why he says he did this stunt and why I think his...
So the reason he's referring to 99.9% of people is because he sees, I'm guessing, the lean mass hyper responder phenotype as some unique world. And if that's the case, you have to give me a reason why the lipid heart hypothesis. So there's two hypotheses we're going to be discussing in this video. One is what Mike the vegan believes, which is the lipid heart hypothesis, which is basically the higher your LDL-C, let's not use the word cholesterol, although he will. So the higher your low density lipoprotein over time, your lifetime exposure to that, the higher your risk, that's how he would put it, that's not how I would put it, of having heart disease, which means either a heart attack or a stroke or something along those lines, right? That is the lipid heart hypothesis. The second hypothesis to understand for this discussion is what's called the lipid energy model. This is Nick's default position. This is Dave Feldman's, who I've interviewed on this channel, his default position, which is that when you are in a state of fat adaptation, the body produces more lipoproteins to traffic energy, to traffic, actually it's not the cholesterol, to traffic triglycerides to the place of the body where it needs to go, because now the body doesn't need as much sugar, right? Doesn't need as much glucose. So it's using the fat mitochondria in the muscle cells particularly, is what we're talking about here, are using the fat substrate to make energy, right? Fats and ketones, both. So when you're in that state, for some select number of people, if you get lean enough, meaning that if you're actually trafficking a lot of the fat in real time, it's not stored fat, you will see increases in your LDL because those VLDLs become LDLs over time. I hope I've done a good job of explaining that. There's an interview I've done with Dave Feldman that goes into the lipid energy model in a lot more detail. So I'd urge you to check that out if it's a little bit confusing. But it's important to understand at the beginning of this video, there's two competing hypotheses. To some extent, they're competing. To some extent, you could hold both of them. But they're two different hypotheses that we're discussing. And so we should just know what everyone's bias is. If I asked you what's the most important cell in the body, what would you say? Would you say the cardiac cell, the heart cell? Would you say the hepatic cell, the liver cell? Would you say some kind of immune cell? The answer, my friends, is none of these. The answer of the most important cell in the body is stem cells, because they can become any of those things and more. We are born producing stem cells, but unfortunately, as we age, our production of stem cells goes down. Fortunately, there is a way to increase our endogenous production of stem cells even as we get older. To find out more, click the link on your screen.
His angle is not a good one for public health. We're going to look at some other egg research as well. So let's just go. All right, now let's see what Nick, the guy who ate all these eggs, has to say about why he did it.
I hypothesized that eating 720 eggs in 1 month, which alone amounts to 133,200 milligrams of cholesterol, would not.
So Nick, these are just big numbers. So there's stuff Nick is doing these days that I guess I can understand why he's doing it, but I'm not a huge fan. And this kind of clickbait stuff, I'm not a huge fan of that. Like, whatever. Like, you ate a lot of eggs. Okay, let's get to the point.
Increase my cholesterol. Specifically, it would not increase my LDL cholesterol.
And yeah, conventional research and wisdom would lead one to believe that much cholesterol and that many eggs would increase his level. But what were the results?
And indeed, drumroll, it didn't. Not a smidge. All those eggs did not increase my cholesterol. Even though my dietary intake of cholesterol more than quintupled, my LDL cholesterol actually dropped by 2% over the first 2 weeks. And
So at 2%, what Nick is not saying is that his standard LDL levels are very high, kind of similar to mine. I run in the 4 to 450 range. Actually, now it's a little bit lower, 350 to 450, let's say. 2% drop on that is like, it's the same. It's not, you can't say the eggs lowered the cholesterol. It's just that you tested on different days and got different results. 2% is not relevant when we're talking about those kind of numbers.
And then it dropped by 18% more over the subsequent 2 weeks.
Yeah, you heard it. So we should just throw away, for example, this meta-analysis of 17 studies, the largest study on the topic of egg cholesterol and blood cholesterol levels, which concludes that their study shows the impact of egg consumption on lipid profiles among health.
So there's two things to say about this study. One, there are other studies, maybe I'll put some on the screen here, that don't show that effect. The most important thing to say is that we don't care about LDL-C and HDL-C ratio and all these other markers that they're measuring. We only care about two things, heart attacks and strokes. Or maybe we care about a third thing, which is plaquing of the arteries. Maybe we care about those three things. We don't care about LDL-C. No one measures LDL-C as a marker of interest on its own. You're looking at it in the context of a marker of interest for heart disease. So if this is all it looked at, this study is completely useless. If all it tells you is LDL-C, it's telling you absolutely nothing.
Healthy subjects with a longer time and more egg consumption, leading to higher LDL to HDL ratio, as well as higher LDL or bad cholesterol levels. And as a meta-analysis of randomized control trials, that is at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, but why do we care? Because again, it's not looking at a marker of interest. It's not looking at all-cause mortality. It's not looking at strokes. It's not looking at heart disease. It's not even looking at plaquing, right? So why should we care about that particular study? There's no reason to care about that study.
Of scientific evidence, well, what he did doesn't even land on the pyramid at all. And he immediately claims there's a reason here, mechanistic.
So doing a case study or an N of one, it's interesting. It's a starting point. And actually, Nick and team, Nick is a researcher. Nick has a PhD. Nick and team have done several studies which show the same thing. So just making fun of him for this N of one experiment, like that doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can if you want to. I suppose you can make fun of anyone for anything, but it just makes you look foolish, right, Mike?
The cholesterol they're eating from eggs, well, your body just handles it differently. Here he is.
Briefly, just high-level summary, when you eat cholesterol, the cholesterol binds to receptors on gut cells, and this stimulates the release of a hormone called colicin. And colicin binds to its receptor on the liver called GPR146, and this inhibits endogenous cholesterol synthesis by the liver, so things balance out and homeostasis is maintained.
Yeah, so that last word is the most key thing, and forget about everything else Nick said. The word homeostasis is super important. That homeostasis, think of it as your body's thermostat. Your body has a literal thermostat in that it keeps your temperature at a certain level, right? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is, right? 37 degrees centigrade, right? But it also has a thermostat when it comes to things like blood sugar, when it comes to things like cholesterol and so on. So that complicated mechanism that he just went through is one way in which the body just keeps that thermostat to where it wants. It wants your cholesterol at a certain level. If you eat more, it'll make less. Pretty easy, right?
So he's saying that colicin just makes it so that dietary cholesterol from eggs doesn't raise your cholesterol. He's at least
no. So if you find that dietary cholesterol is raising your cholesterol, it might be the case. I mean, you have to prove to me that that's a bad thing. It might be the case that you actually, you're actually running too low. Your cholesterol, quote unquote. Again, we're not measuring cholesterol. We're measuring mostly lipoproteins here. It might be the case that your body wants more, but you're not giving it enough fuel to do that. You're not giving it enough substrate. You're not giving it enough fat, whatever it may be, right? So if you are eating dietary cholesterol and your cholesterol goes up, you have to prove to me that that's a bad thing. And of course, Mike can't prove anything. So anyway, let's see.
Implying that, yet again, meta-analysis of 17 studies showing that is clearly not the case. So we can't get too caught up in mechanism here.
So why would the meta-analysis show that people who ate eggs saw their LDL-C going up? Probably those people weren't eating enough dietary cholesterol or dietary fat or whatever the substrate is needed to make cholesterol in the first place, right? That's one possibility. Another possibility is LDL-C has multiple functions in the body. One of those functions is as part of the immune system. And it could be the case that, eating something that's being given to them is actually increasing inflammation, right? And that inflammation is causing the LDL response, because, as I say, LDL is a marker of immune function. So it could be the case that, it's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's always a good thing. It could be the case that whatever they're giving them is toxic in the particular cocktail that they're talking about, right? I don't know. Or the eggs are serving some toxic purpose. That's possible, but extremely unlikely, right? So just telling me about this study shows that eating eggs increases LDL-C, that's telling me literally nothing. Like nothing about clinical outcomes, nothing about all-cause mortality. It's just meaningless.
But wait, with all the cholesterol and eggs that he ate, his LDL did go down. So what the heck is going on here?
Again, it did not go down meaningfully. If I measure my cholesterol on 3 different days, I'll get 3 different readings. And I don't think they won't be very different, but they might be 2% different. 2%, just to give you a context, if my number is 400, 2% of that is what? Is 8, right? So going from, 400 to 392, like that's a rounding error, right?
And the first major red flag is how his cholesterol chart doesn't seem to have a y-axis. I think this was completely done on purpose. I mean, just looking around, how many...
Mike, don't be an idiot, man. Like, why would it be on purpose? Like, who cares? If you look on the internet and Google Nick Norwitz LDL, you will find out that his LDL is in the range that I just told you, between whatever, 400 and 500, or maybe slightly higher than 500 even. I don't remember. So it's not like it's a secret. Like, it's not like there's some malicious purpose here, right?
Cholesterol charts don't have a y-axis. Actually, none.
Yeah, dude, you're comparing it to published research. This is a freaking YouTube infographic, right?
Why would he do this? Because he knows that the level would be so glaringly strange that he could no longer use this as a clickbait story that the average person would think of.
I don't think it would have made any difference, to be perfectly honest. Again, is the lipid heart hypothesis that if your cholesterol is above a certain level, it doesn't matter? Is that what you're saying? Like, or if your cholesterol is above a certain level, then consuming cholesterol doesn't matter? What is your hypothesis? What are you working with here? Or are you just trying to poke holes in someone's theory because you can? You can poke holes in anyone's theory. That's not really doing much, right?
Applies to them. And he does get into the clickbait aspect of this at the end, and I will respond to him there. But it's important to just understand who Nick is, where he's coming from here. And that is that he's somebody who is regularly on a ketogenic diet. And he's one of the types.
He's someone who needs to eat a ketogenic diet for his inflammatory bowel disease. And when he was not on a ketogenic diet, when he was taking medicines, he spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital, and he nearly died, right? If I understand his story correctly. So if you're going to represent someone's story, try and represent it accurately, Mike.
People that when they do that, they get their fat really high up. Their LDL, that bad cholesterol, just skyrockets high, insanely high, 400, 500. 600.
What I will say, what Nick has said and what I can affirm from my own experimentation is that is the case even if you're on a vegan ketogenic diet. So if you're not taking any eggs at all, your LDL still stays very high if you have this phenotype, right?
600, 700, some people get to 1,000. And I know that his level personally can get up at least around 400, which is, yes, 4 times the cutoff for what is considered optimal. And he's also somebody that has a history of experimenting with his LDL level, clocking it up and down by changing these macro levels. And that has to do with carbohydrates, which he does touch on.
What accounts for that change in drop slope? Well, carbohydrates, dietary carbohydrates. Adding back carbs, really of any sort, be it Oreos, fruit, or starches, is sufficient to reduce LDL in the so-called lean mass hyperresponder phenotype.
And he's learned that he can just crank his LDL way down from 400 or whatever by about 70% just by adding carbs. It doesn't matter the source. And with this in mind,
So what Mike has to do and what he's not doing is to explain the lipid energy model. Why would that be the case? When you increase substrate from some other form, from carbohydrates, which get broken down into sugar, your body needs to traffic less of those VLDLs, triglyceride-rich, energy-rich VLDLs, which then turn into fewer LDLs further down the pike, right? So there's actually a model which explains what Nick is doing in his experimentation very, very well. And I think by not explaining that, maybe Mike doesn't understand it himself. He's not a very smart person, and he's been vegan for so long, he's probably lost a lot of brain cells or brain power. So maybe I shouldn't fault him for this. But if you don't explain the model by which Nick is doing his experimentation, you make him sound like just some idiot who's doing random things to his body, right? That's not what he's doing. He has a theoretical framework within which he's operating. It wasn't developed by him. It was developed partly by him, but mostly by Dave Feldman and others. So he has that theoretical model within which he's doing this experimentation, and all of his experiments have reaffirmed the validity of that model. And not just his experiments, now I think, I don't know how many papers, 17 papers in the published data referring to the lipid energy model, right? So I think just pretending this is, I don't know, some dude, I don't know, basically sitting in the back and doing weird experiments in class. Nick is a student. Nick is a PhD. He's also a medical student now. I don't think he's being fair to Nick with this kind of talk.
He did his Oreo experiment, which he lowered his LDL from 384 down to 70% less. And he did show that chart in this video here. You can just see, 384 down there as he added carbs. So he's taking advantage of a metabolic situation that he is familiar with, which I personally think is...
This whole thing is about metabolism, right? Lipid energy. This is about how the body processes energy. That is metabolism, right? So taking advantage of a metabolic situation, like, do you not understand this? This is about metabolism. That's all it's about.
Highly dangerous. We'll talk about that later. But thankfully, some of the smarter commenters saw the actual plot here. A Chase Poke says, why didn't you show any test results? The fact that you didn't show your LDL before and after numbers is very strange. This is a very unscientific video that people are now going to use as evidence that eggs don't raise cholesterol. He showed the Oreo LDL results and his cholesterol was crazy high to start with, 384. It will be a lot easier to get a drop if your numbers are sky high to start.
Yeah. So what is my response to this? Like, again, it's not hidden. Nick's LDL numbers are not hidden. Anyone can go and Google it. This guy's Googled it. He's been very open and very public about all this, to his credit. And it does take courage. I mean, even for me to write the kind of blogs that I've written about my LDL and so on, I get hammered for some of that stuff by people who know much less about it than I do, to be perfectly honest. So, I mean, hats off to Nick for his courage and being completely open about it, right? He's not hiding anything.
Exactly. So it's likely that he started this experiment with an LDL around 400, maybe even 500, and it was still at around, mid 300s or 400 by the end. And as he says in the video, he again achieved this drop by adding in carbohydrates, in this case, fruit.
Included bananas, blueberries, strawberries, and a few...
So the source of the carbohydrates is not going to matter. The point is that all carbohydrates break down into sugar in the body. That's the point. And if the lipid energy model is correct, which all the data seems to show that it is correct, then it really doesn't matter if you're eating Oreos or blueberries. It's the same stuff.
Few frozen cherries.
And he goes on to say,
the extra dose of carbs dominated over the insane amounts of cholesterol I was eating.
And yeah, it is the case.
Seeing it as a competition between substrates, using the word dominated, I don't think that's exactly what's going on. Your body is running on fat completely. And when it's running on fat, your LDL is at a certain level. And then you change your macros so that your body is running through a combination of fat and carbs. And to the extent that carbs are in, your LDL is going to drop, right? That's what the lipid energy model will predict, and seems to be true in this case. So seeing it as a competition, implying that eggs would have raised the cholesterol, when eggs didn't raise the cholesterol before you started taking the carbs, I don't think you're looking at it the right way.
Okay, so that the carbohydrate increase, dropping LDL, overpowered the LDL raising effect of whatever dietary cholesterol.
Again, the eggs on its own did not raise LDL in Nick's particular case, right? So there is no egg effect here.
He was eating, and he was eating a ton. So does this mean that really, dietary cholesterol doesn't have an effect? No, I think it's more likely that there are a couple of things going on here. First of which is the dietary cholesterol ceiling that we see, for example, from this meta-analysis, from this chart as dietary cholesterol.
So again, this is the kind of chart that we see all over. And there are many things you could take away from it, but one is just that, your body has a certain set point as in terms of what it wants as cholesterol, LDL. I'm not even sure what the hell they're measuring here. Serum cholesterol. So your body has a certain amount that it wants. Everything's on a thermostat. It's all about homeostasis. And if you're not at that amount, if you're at 0, then you are going to see a significant effect to get it back to where the body wants it. But if your body is where it wants, so the people who started at 500, for example, it's already pretty close to where the body wants it, they don't see much of an effect, right? So, this is just, and we see this with everything. We see this with, iron levels. We see this with magnesium levels. We see this with sodium levels even. So basically all of the micronutrients, things like vitamin C that can be measured, intracellular vitamin C, etc. You'll see this with everything. So just showing this graph to me and putting cholesterol there, it could be literally anything. because this is how the body works. This is how homeostasis works.
Levels really increase into those higher levels. The effect on blood cholesterol tapers off. I mean, going from 0 to 500 milligrams of dietary cholesterol has a way more dramatic effect than going from 1,500 to 2,000. Now, what exactly is going on? Is it that your body just has an absorption limit? It goes, I don't need to absorb that much cholesterol, and then it doesn't affect blood cholesterol.
So need to absorb that much cholesterol. What does that tell you? That tells you your body probably knows what it's doing, right, Mike? See, the thing that annoys me about some of these vegans is they should have enough data to make better analysis or to make better decisions even for themselves, but somehow the data never seems to interfere with their bias.
Less important than the fact that most people that are watching this video, I would venture to say 99% of them, would not be taking advantage of the cholesterol ceiling. They are eating a diet in which adding more.
So what you're saying is that 99% of people watching this video need to eat more dietary cholesterol. Is that what you want to say? Because that's exactly what you just said.
More eggs would increase LDL cholesterol, which again is causal to atherosclerosis from Mendelian randomization.
Ooh, Mendelian randomization. Dude, this is some serious crap. I didn't know he was going to go this low. This is the European Heart Journal. First of all, the statement that this is taken from is not any kind of an actual peer-reviewed research paper. It's a consensus statement, I think, the European Heart Journal, right? Secondly, in most, or I imagine all of these Mendelian randomized controlled trials, randomized Mendelian studies, and so on, LDL is not measured. Instead, they're taking many, many genes that they think code for higher LDL and measuring that and seeing how people do against various indicators and so on. The Mendelian randomization stuff, I mean, that's a video in its own right, and I won't go into it, but man, it is flawed stuff. Really, really unhelpful to cite that here. I mean, it's terrible.
Studies and other data that we have, LDL is causal to atherosclerosis. And what is also...
So that's not how a responsible scientist would say it, right? Even someone who agrees with the lipid heart hypothesis, what they would say is LDL is causally associated, that is the words that they use, with heart disease. And I'm not so sure about that, to be perfectly honest. The more I get into it, the more I find people who have very low, I assume what they mean by that is that the blood LDL level, having a high blood LDL level is necessary but not sufficient for the creation of heart disease. And I don't see that. I mean, I see many people, there's a video that dropped this week by Dr. Mindy, I think, where she talks about someone who got their LDL super low, like single digits, and still developed pretty bad heart disease, had a heart attack or a stroke. I don't remember what their event was, right? So I think, and here we have to talk about, Dr. Popper and Karl Popper and the disparity between positive and negative evidence. If you have 100 points of evidence showing that higher cholesterol is associated with more heart disease, that does not prove causation. But if you have one example of someone who didn't have high cholesterol and did have heart disease, then that disproves that, or that is certainly stronger evidence than all of the positive evidence. In other words, negative evidence has a lot better value, is a lot more useful to the scientific method overall than all of this positive correlational stuff, right? I think that, first of all, he's stating it wrong. And I think that the smart people who are stating it correctly, they're starting to state it even more correctly in the sense that they're starting to put certain caveats in and so on, and talk about certain populations in which we may not be worried about the LDL, right? So I think Mike is behind the science here.
Relevant to people who are trying to lower their risk and might decide to lower cholesterol as well is back to this chart. They actually stratified it by starting cholesterol amount. And you can see that somebody who's not eating any cholesterol or cholesterol from animals, their rise from eating cholesterol is much more dramatic. So it's clear that there's an opportunity here to get the cholesterol out of the diet and lower that LDL or bad cholesterol.
Why on earth would we want to do that? I mean, so what you have shown me with this chart, let's bring that chart back online. What you have shown me is that the body wants a certain level of cholesterol. And if your body is very low dietary cholesterol, between 0 and 100, you're basically in a nutrient deficient state. And that's one way to interpret this data. And therefore, the people who were given the nutrients that they needed, their body actually increased it by whatever that number 1 is, or 1.2. Is it 12-fold or something? It'll be something very high because you're starting at 0, right? His interpretation certainly it's not the only interpretation of this graph. I don't even think it's I don't think it's a plausible interpretation of this graph.
their rise from eating cholesterol is much more dramatic. So it's clear that there's an opportunity here to get the cholesterol out of the diet and
Don't ever get the cholesterol out of your diet. There's no reason to do that.
lower that LDL or bad cholesterol, which causes heart disease. And I would add that the concern here isn't even just about cholesterol that he ate. It's also about the saturated fat that he ate. He was saying that toward the end, he was eating about 75 grams of saturated fat. And that's insane and would raise the LDL of any normal dietary person.
Really, what evidence do you have to back that up? Show me some evidence backing that up. We don't really have an understanding of how saturated fat increases LDL. What we think may be going on in play is something to do with the LDL receptors. I think I made a video about this recently with Simon Hill. But most of that data is animal data, and there's not good data on humans. So for some of the so-called increase in saturated fat, what we can attribute that to is that when you actually don't take saturated fat, when you take PUFAs, when you take polyunsaturated fats, especially the omega-6 rich linoleic acid, which we know is not the best thing to be consuming, then that inhibits the production of endogenous cholesterol. There's these plant sterols that can look like cholesterol in the body, and therefore we think it actually may not be a good thing. We know that those plant sterols are associated with heart disease. Again, I can't talk about causation here, but there are many reasons that unsaturated fats lower cholesterol. So if the effect that we're seeing with saturated fat, is it the fact that unsaturated fats lower cholesterol, or is it that saturated fats increase cholesterol? You need to show me some experimental data to prove that your hypothesis is correct, that it's the latter.
But I think what's going on here is a bit more dangerous, especially combined with the narrative that the egg industry is pushing out. They, of course, fund a ton.
Dude, what the egg industry? What the frick are you talking about this? Like the vegans, what you have to understand about all the nutrition science is that it's all industry funded. So going after one industry and not the other, like I'm as anti-capitalist as the next person, but just saying that this, I just dismissing entire swathes of research because you don't like the fact that it's industry funded. Like you wouldn't be able to look at any of the research, even the research that you like in that case, right? In fact, I can guarantee without looking into it that of all the studies he's put on the screen so far, more than half of them are industry funded. Maybe all of them are industry funded. So, yeah.
Ton of studies, and here's an egg industry shill and their paper saying, oh yeah, recent findings are inconsistent regarding the possible relationship between egg consumption and cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. And
they're not just inconsistent. We can find papers that don't show an effect, and we can also find papers that show the opposite effect, right? People consuming more eggs and their heart risk goes down. The heart disease incidence goes down. It's much clearer than what that statement said, in my opinion.
Well, I do believe that signals can kind of be crossed when we have a standard American diet where people are eating a ton of animal saturated fat from different sources. Can it drown out some eggs in some situations? Maybe. But it's also the case that, for example, from a large 2021 study like this on over 500,000 people, each intake of an additional half of a whole egg per day.
Look at the rates here. 1.07. These are barely significant. So just to give you, in this kind of cohort data, we would want to see an RR, so a risk ratio of at least 2. And that's just to posit a hypothesis that would then need confirmation in the actual lab, right? So the purpose of all these observational studies is just to look, can we see patterns? And if you see a signal of less than 2 in a positive sense, or 0.7, but maybe at least 0.75 in a negative sense, then it's not even worth testing that hypothesis. So the data that he's showing on the screen shows that he's wrong. Eggs do not increase all-cause mortality, right?
Was associated with a 7% increase in all-cause mortality and cardiovascular and cancer mortality. In other words, in a normal, healthy human context, adding, say, 5 eggs per day would increase risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality by 70%.
That is nonsense. That's not what the study said. That is not what the study said. Let me just look and make sure that that's not what the study said. This associational data, and even at the 70% number, we're still not at the 2.0 risk ratio that would actually warrant further study. So even if what Mike's interpretation is correct, I'll need to look at the study and make up my own mind. I encourage you to do the same. But even if it were correct, it still wouldn't warrant even an experimental study. Like if I went to a grant board and tried to get with this data and said, look, I want to do an RCT on one group that eats eggs and one group that doesn't, it wouldn't get funded because there's not enough of a hypothesis basis. In other words, the signal to noise ratio is not clear enough in this particular observational data to say that eggs might be doing anything, even if you multiply the effect by 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 times, right?
Percent increase in all-cause mortality and cardiovascular and cancer mortality. In other words, in a normal, healthy human context, adding, say, 5 eggs per day would increase risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality by 70%.
So again, we'd want to see at least 100% increase before we even did any observational studies. That's an RR of 2.0.
Or in the words of Dr. Ken Berry, eggs are a heart-healthy food for all humans.
So I don't know if Mike is smart enough to know that Dr. Berry is right here so far, or at least it hasn't been disproved. That's the null hypothesis, unless you show me very good quality data to the contrary.
As many as you want. And they did look further at eggs without cholesterol versus eggs with cholesterol, talking to egg whites, and they did find that, yes, for each additional 300 milligrams of dietary cholesterol per day, that was associated with 19, 16, and 24% higher all-cause cardiovascular disease and cancer.
So again, in these kind of observational cohort studies, we want an RR of 2.0. That's a 100% increase before we even begin to postulate that causation might be a thing. To prove causation, you can't prove causation with correlational data. But if there's an RR of 6, in other words, a 600% increase, then people will begin to say, okay, look, according to Bradford Hill criteria and so on, it looks like this is probably part of the causal chain. This might be causative, right? But these percentages that he's putting on the screen are meaningless.
Mortality, respectively, in particular, saying that the cholesterol was responsible for, between 50 and 63% of the mortality effects in whole.
Yeah, the mediation models. So this isn't even the real data. This is adjusted data using a model. So this is actually worse than I'm saying. In other words, these are probably some pro-vegan doctors who did this. I don't know. I need to look at the study, but certainly the pro-plant-based people who think eggs are not healthy. That's what this statement is basically telling me. And they've created certain models with certain assumptions. And even according to those assumptions, they can't hit the 2x or the 100% increase that we would need to see in order to actually think this is meaningful data. So they're not reporting what they see, they're adjusting the data. And then even the adjusted data doesn't make a big enough inference to come to any kind of conclusion that would even, any kind of hypothesis that would actually be worth testing. So I don't know if Mike understands exactly how bad the data is that he's presenting, and he seems to be hanging his hat on here, but there we are.
Eggs. And this 2022 study on over 3.5 million people comes to a similar conclusion: more eggs, more cardiovascular.
So let's just look at the CVD risk. 1.04. Are you kidding me? This is, and it crosses the 1 ratio. This is complete nonsense. This is absolutely complete nonsense. Pooled relative risk 1.04. Mike is basically proving the opposite. He's proving that you should eat as many eggs as you want because the hazard ratios we're talking about are so low. 1.1, 1.13. Again, we want to see hazard ratios of 2.0 to even begin thinking that there may be something going on here.
Vascular disease. But then the question becomes, why wasn't he just straightforward, starting the first sentence of the video saying, hey, I'm in a unique situation on my keto diet where my LDL is insane, but I can eat as many eggs as I want as long as I add carbs, unlike most people, in which case it would be very dangerous. Why didn't he do that? Well, he wanted to do some...
There's no evidence that his LDL is dangerous. Look at the stuff on the screen. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is, so I know Nick's team. I haven't talked with Nick personally, but I know his approach very well. He's all about the nuance. But in order to have a nuanced discussion, you have to actually start with the headline. You have to start with, the clickbaity stuff. I criticized him earlier in this video for doing clickbait, but how else is he going to get the views? I mean, how else are people going to actually pay attention to him, right? So it's a two-sided thing. And he leads with the headline stuff, and then he goes into the nuance, which I think, credit to him for his approach. I think it's a good approach.
Clickbaity stuff to get attention.
What you'll find, no surprise, is that more extreme messages carry further. They become memes. They can self-propagate and spread a message. Sadly, the messages on social media, particularly in the diet space, are often shallow or hollow. But in their best forms, I think they can serve as intellectual provocation to bring people together.
I agree with Nick a lot on this. I mean, I think that, listen, most of what we know about health and nutrition science and so on, we're barely scratching the surface. We don't know very much at all. So this kind of provocation to challenge people's firmly held beliefs, most of which are wrong, is probably a good idea.
provided those people are willing to listen to the words being said and the actual arguments being made when you go a level deeper beyond the packaging.
Yeah, he's calling it intellectual provocation and how his Oreo experiment actually got people involved in research, etc. And I would say in that case, Oreos and sugar aren't generally seen as a major, LDL riser and cause of heart.
What the hell are you talking about? They're not seen as a health food. That's the whole point, right? It has nothing to do with LDL. The point is, this is an experiment that Feldman did back in 2018, I want to say, where he did his so-called prison food diet, where he lowered his LDL on a diet of like white bread and bologna, pretty much. So I don't know if Mike is deliberately misleading his viewers or if he honestly doesn't understand what's going on here, because it's not complicated.
Heart disease, I know sugar does have a role, but in this case, we're talking about eggs contributing to the increase in LDL and heart disease being our number one killer, and this being just a much more dangerous connection to try and sever.
Why is it dangerous? You have to prove to me that it's dangerous, and you've given me nothing here that shows anything like that, right? The RR ratios that you showed basically show me the opposite. If you have people who are looking really hard for a signal, and the best signal they can find is a 1.1 hazard ratio, like that's not a signal.
Incentive structure drives content creators to give you extremes, like 720 eggs. Now, contemplate, what's the effect of that? What's the effect on me, on you, and then back on me? Is it bad?
Yes, you reinforce the idea that eggs are not bad for heart health to 200.
So it's super important that people learn that eggs are not bad for heart health. At least we don't have evidence to that effect. In fact, you've proven in this video that we don't have evidence to that effect, right? So I'm not saying, should everyone be eating eggs? I don't know. I mean, the people who have allergies and so on, people should do the best that they can, make the best decisions that they can. But most of us were told to limit our consumption of eggs or reduce or eliminate our consumption of eggs altogether. And there's no scientific data or very little scientific data that would back up that recommendation. So I think there's a difference between making new recommendations, which is eat as many eggs as you want, which is not what anyone's saying. But what Nick is saying and what I'm saying is that the current guidelines that we have, this current data that we have, the current data that you're citing, does not provide an evidence base for the guidelines to reduce eggs. It just does not.
150,000 people, and you did that partially by excluding the y-axis on a chart. And I will say there's one thing.
Excluding the y-axis is nonsense. Again, anyone can look up Nick's LDL levels. It's not a secret, right?
Thing is like, here's what Nick did, and here's what the news outlets did, which is just completely running with it. Where many of these articles just completely omitted the fact that—
Listen, the fact that the guy's story went viral, like, are you using that as a criticism of him? You would love for your stories to go viral. So, I'm seeing, what is this saying? The green-eyed monster? Is this just jealousy? Is this just sour grapes, Mike?
That he is in a unique dietary situation and did this through carbohydrates. But they, of course, mentioned the coalescin aspect. So is he responsible for that poor and dangerous reporting? Well, I wouldn't say that he's fully responsible.
So you've just described your opinion about people's reporting without putting a single article like that on the screen. I mean, I'm as big a critic of the news media as anyone else is, but you can't just disparage people without actually referring to them, right? Disparage a whole content, a whole stream of things without even saying what it is you're disparaging. It just makes you look foolish.
Responsible for it, but I do think he is responsible for setting a trap here. I mean, he's obviously not a dumb guy. He knew that people want eggs to be healthy. He knew that it would be.
So again, that's not, I think vegans think everyone is just going around lusting after meat and eggs because that's what they do. That's what they're doing secretly. They're looking for egg replacements. They're looking for meat replacements. They're preoccupied constantly with food. And I say that as someone who's vegan for a long time. And I can tell you that the preoccupation with food is a real thing. And the preoccupation with meat and eggs is a real thing, right? So, but most people I know are not thinking of, are not like, oh, dude, I wish I could eat more eggs. That's not the real world, right? In the real world, people just eat what they eat. If they're jonesing for anything, if they're craving anything, it's usually some combination of fats and sugars, not eggs, right?
Newsworthy to make it look like eggs don't have a negative effect or even have a positive effect on cholesterol. And in terms of the response, I don't think.
So again, no one should be caring about anything's effect on cholesterol. We should care about things' effect on heart disease. And if you care about heart disease, if you're worried about your own heart disease risk, you should actually be scanning your heart. There are many ways to do it. Calcium score is one of them. And not looking at LDL or these surrogate markers that don't tell us very much.
Any comment sums it up better than this one. As the Irish Mirror shared, quote, "I clicked because I knew that your LDL would not increase, and I want share this video with some of family that freaks out that I am eating all eggs and meat." And so yeah, people are literally using this video as a stamp of approval to continue with their bad habits.
So again, it's not a stamp of approval, right? The guy was eating eggs and meat before this freaking video came out. He wants to help educate his friends and family who may not understand what can happen in the case of an individual or what can happen at the level of a group, right? Or the fact that we don't have good data for the kind of nutritional guidelines that you seem to be supporting, right?
And this reminds me of a really just situation where somebody could have acted the way that he did, but decided not to. And that brings me to plant-based cardiologist Danielle Bellardo talking about a type 2 diabetic patient who went on a bender.
I had a patient in residency who reversed their, I actually don't like using the word reverse, sorry, put their diabetes into remission, improved their hemoglobin A1C. This patient went from eating just a ton of processed foods, whatever, and went on a cocaine binge for a few months, okay?
Wait a sec. Mike, the vegan, are you really such an idiot? You're going to compare eggs to cocaine? Is that really what you're doing in this video? Wow.
Literally a cocaine binge and eating Twinkies, candy bars, but low calorie. And their hemoglobin A1C and their high-risk CRP totally normalized.
Yeah.
From that anecdote, would we be universally recommending cocaine and Twinkies as a diet? Of course not, right? We can't extrapolate from anecdotes.
Now, if she wanted to play Nick's angle, she might have gotten together with that person and made a video about how, oh, no, maybe actually drugs and alcohol and whatever can cure diabetes. Oh, but just ambiguous.
So Mike, you are an idiot. I didn't think you were such a big idiot, but you are a big idiot. So you are comparing the effects of cocaine, a modern substance, a substance of abuse, a substance which can have all kinds of health effects, right? And the health effect that's of interest is not reversing diabetes. The health effect that's of interest is that person would have been emaciated. That person was dirt poor. That's why they were eating Twinkies, right? That person may have been near death, may have been in the hospital for various things, including overdoses and so on. And you're just picking out one effect of that, which is the lowering of the blood sugar, and saying, well, maybe we should compare that with eggs because look at what it did to the cholesterol. The eggs had none of the negative effects. Nick is still there. Nick is looking as healthy as he ever has. Nick still has his freaking inflammatory bowel disease that put him in the hospital. He still has that in remission after eating whatever it is, 40 eggs a day or whatever the amount was, right? So, I mean, I feel like I'm explaining this to a toddler. You can't compare proper human food, whatever that human food is, right? If someone said kale is like cocaine, I would have the same problems, right? But you can't compare proper human food to freaking someone who's having a problem with addiction and then end up in the hospital with some markers improved, but most markers not improved, right? She didn't tell us all of that person's blood work, I promise you. So this is just, wow, this is a whole new level of idiocy. I knew he wasn't the brightest cookie on the block, but this is, wow, this is a whole nother level.
The title could have been, "I cured my diabetes with cocaine." Million views. But instead she used it as an example of how unhealthy habits can falsely be used to present a health solution.
That individual lost a substantial amount of weight, which is why that happened.
Sure.
In a really negative way, right? They lost weight because they weren't eating, because they were using cocaine. That is nothing I would ever recommend to patients.
And I'm saying maybe because she took a Hippocratic oath or whatever, something that reads in a popular version, quote, "I will..."
So he's really doubling down on this, man. So eggs for him are exactly like cocaine. Okay, I mean, you're just proving that you're an idiot. I mean, go ahead.
Prevent disease wherever I can. For prevention is...
So just to give you, I mean, maybe I'll look up and I'll put a study with cocaine use and all-cause mortality or something like that. The RRs for cocaine are huge. And you put an RR of 1.1 on the screen, and you think that it has any meaning. Give me a break, man.
Preferable to cure, and also that I will mislead the public into believing that harmful substances are actually healthy for views.
So harmful substances. Again, eggs are not cocaine. Are you a fucking idiot?
I don't remember seeing that one on there. And just for a little bit more background before I close the video, Nick Norwitz is also the one working with other authors on the whole lean mass hyperresponder.
Yes, and one of those authors, by the way, is someone called Matthew Budoff, who is a lipid heart hypothesis person, who actually, he is the one who's doing the freaking data, right? He is deeply entrenched in the whole lipid heart hypothesis model. He trained some of the key people there, including the person who trained Peter Attia, his name I'm currently blanking on. Dr. Lipid, he goes by on Twitter or X or whatever. So there are open-minded people who are actually part of their research team and doing all this work that you're trying to discredit here. And you don't frankly understand it from what I can tell.
Gimmick study, as I now refer to it, they call that.
But calling it a gimmick study when we have, again, Professor Budoff and Dr. Budoff as the lead researcher there, I mean, I don't think you understand what a revolutionary person that person is in this field. I don't know what you're trying to say here.
High rise in LDL among some other things, which is happening in these skinnier keto people as lean mass hyperresponders. And they're trying to make a study showing that these high LDL levels don't increase atherosclerosis. And I have a ton of problems with the study. I responded to it before. No, there was essentially a whistleblower who was involved with the study.
So Spencer Nadolsky is not a whistleblower. He has his criticisms. Dave has responded to his criticisms, but he's not a whistleblower. That's not what he is.
Came out and said, hey, there's some shady stuff going on. They're excluding people in their group only that have heart disease or a coronary artery calcium score greater than 0. And they also did some other sketchy things like not adjust for the statistically significantly different BMI.
Why would you adjust data? When you adjust data, you're showing what you want to show. You show the data that you're reporting. You report as best as you can. You match two cohorts the best you can, and you report what you see. When you're doing adjustments, I mean, now you're just using algorithms to try and prove something, and you just keep adjusting until you get a finding that you like or a finding that you don't like, one or the other, right?
Pressed one of the other authors on it. They essentially said, we don't believe in adjustment in this situation because our group,
because they're actually scientists, right?
Group is so special. And well, guess what? If you think the group that you're studying is so special and you're making special research exception for them, you're going to get special results. So I would bet.
No, but the group is special. It's not a population that's been studied before, right? Healthy population with sky high LDL, sky high HDL, and low triglycerides, never been studied. So either you understand nothing about research, or you're basically admitting that you're wrong here.
Almost anything at the end of that year-long study, if they're going to find exactly what they wanted to find, because that is their goal.
So again, the main investigator is someone who agrees with you, not someone who agrees with them. That is the person who's doing all these scans and trials and so on, right? The person who has contributed far more to the lipid heart hypothesis, certainly than you have, but than anyone you've cited in this video, right? One of the leading lipidologist researchers is the person who's doing the data. And you still have a problem with that?
And that's why I once again needed to respond to Nick's public health messaging, because in the past, he's led a lot of people to believe that they're these lean mass hyper responders. And then somewhere halfway hidden in the video, he goes, oh, well, not as many people are these lean mass hyper responders as they think. And
so, unlike Mike and some of the other vegans, I don't believe in talking down to your audience, right? So you tell your audience what you are in one video. You don't have to tell them what you are in every single video, right? Those of us who have been following this for a long time, I've been following this longer than Nick has, for example. We know who he's talking about. We know exactly what's going on, right? And if you see a video and it interests you, then you better do further research, including this video. I think Mike is not giving Nick's audience enough credit. I don't know, if you think, for example, that Oreos are a health food, I mean, that's on you. You're not thinking properly, right?
He's really burying the lead of the major warnings that should be put with all of this, even if he truly believes the things he's saying. And in that case, leading people to eat as much animal fat and meat and all these things as they want and feel great about it. And so I had to comment on.
So again, the null hypothesis is that the foods that an animal has evolved to eat are the foods that the animal should be eating. They're going to be the healthiest for the animal. And all that we know about human evolution is that we evolved to eat more fatty animal foods, including eggs. But I haven't really looked into the literature for how deep egg eating goes back in human history, but it's certainly many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, right? But definitely meat, right? Fatty meat, especially megafauna, which are no longer available. Things the size of elephants, but they were not just elephants, giant badgers, giant beavers, giant wombats, all kinds of things, right? That's human evolution. Now, if you're telling me that's not healthy food, you have to give me a very, very strong reason. And an RR of 1.1 is not near enough. Like we're not talking near enough data to conclude, not that those foods are healthy, but that those foods are unhealthy, right? So I think we need to be very cautious with our language here, challenging the guidelines, saying that the guidelines are not evidence-based, that there's no, the data, for example, for reducing dietary cholesterol, for reducing dietary saturated fat is far more nuanced than we are led to believe. As you have proven in this video, perhaps unwittingly. That's an important discussion. It does not follow from that you should eat as much meat as you want. That is just not the conclusion, right? The conclusion is meat is not an unhealthy food, or it's not been proven to be an unhealthy food as yet, right? How we phrase these and how we add nuance to it is a really important piece of this discussion. You can't just strawman your opponents by saying that they're saying something which they're not saying.
On this pattern that I'm seeing with Nick, where he's essentially using this weird metabolic fluke or whatever's going on that is increasing this LDL.
It's not a metabolic fluke. It's fluke. What he's saying by this, he's saying that he doesn't understand the lipid energy model. He has no excuse. I mean, he's someone who cites data. I assume he knows how to read a paper, although to be honest, he cites data so badly, I don't know if he knows how to read a scientific paper. But there are like 17 papers on the lipid energy model that are published. Not just by Nick now, by other people as well, not just by Nick's team. The original work was done by Nick and Dave and Adrian Sotomoda and that team. But now there's other teams that are picking up that as well, because that's where the science is taking us, right? So if you don't understand the lipid energy model, you shouldn't brag about it. You shouldn't say, oh, fancy metabolic, whatever. You're basically showing your ignorance as a kind of a badge of honor, which is a pretty foolish thing to do.
And leading people to believe in this weird, soft, half ambiguous way that they can eat as much animal products as they want. They can eat as much eggs as they want. They can have as high of LDL as they would.
Again, that's not what anyone is saying. I think we need to be very clear. What we're saying is that in certain circumstances, what Nick's video says is in certain circumstances, eggs do not raise LDL cholesterol or LDL, right? That seems pretty clear. And that's a pretty unambiguous thing to say. And it's a pretty true thing to say. You've admitted that in this video too, right? So I don't see what the issue is.
Want, and they'll be just fine. Whether he's explicitly saying that or not, he is absolutely not explicitly starting his videos with the warnings that they deserve to have. So
so whatever, man. Like, do you start with your videos saying that there has never been a human population on Earth that has been the long-term vegan and thrived? Do you start that way? Because you should. If you apply the same standards that you're applying to Nick, you should mention that there's no population in human history that has ever been vegan. That's how you should start every freaking video, right? But you don't.
And no, he did not prove that eggs don't raise cholesterol. He did not.
He did in one particular circumstance. So again, we have the black swan piece, right? If there's evidence that all swans are white, if that's my hypothesis, I can find 1 million white swans. It doesn't prove anything, right? They could be the next swan I find, and we know this because there are black swans in Australia. I go to Australia, I find one black swan. Let's say there were only one black swan in the whole of Australia. That one black swan disproves the hypothesis. So looking at the outliers is actually a key piece of the scientific method.
Not disprove, that meta-analysis of 17 studies, for example.
I'm going to look at this because he relied on this so much, and look at some of the studies that it's come up with. If I find anything interesting in those studies, I'll post it on the screen. Again, if you find 100 million white swans, it does not prove that all swans are white. If you find 20 pieces of evidence saying that, well, in this case, it's about cholesterol concentration. So it's not even a relevant marker. We care about strokes. We care about heart attacks. We care about heart disease, blockage, right? Plaques. This measured none of that. So why should we even care about this meta-analysis?
Largest one on that topic. Sadly, the news articles, as he desired, absolutely ate this up and are spreading the misinformation that eggs don't have it.
Again, sour grapes, eh? If someone makes a piece of content and it goes viral, is that what you're going to criticize them for?
Any negative effect. And this is something that people are going to read, and they're going to latch onto this idea for years. And they're going to say, hey, that one guy ate 700 eggs and nothing happened. I can just slam down these omelets and bacon and eggs and all that.
If someone thinks that without understanding what's going on in ketogenic diets, without understanding fat adaptation, that is on that person, right? You need to actually understand that there are certain fuel straits that we can use, fat fuel straits, that don't have as much harm as using carbohydrates as a fuel straight. So if you combine that, if you're eating, a big bowl of rice with 17 eggs, that may be harmful based on first principles, based on what we understand about biochemistry and so on. Maybe. On the other hand, there are cultures that have been eating eggs and rice for many thousands of years and seem to be fine, right? So, just pointing out that this is that piece of work that is meant to disprove a hypothesis. This is looking at the black swan. That's pretty much what Mike is agreeing here. But what he disagrees with is that that's an important thing to say. It's a very important thing to say if we want to understand the scientific method, right? You need to look at the outliers. Otherwise, you'd learn nothing.
That stuff. Yet Nick is painting it as, oh, this is all just some fun intellectual experiment. Well, no, this is like public health messaging, and the result is really not good, as we can see from the comments. comments here. And so I would go ahead and say that he should make a follow-up video.
So again, like this next level fitness 7 comment on the bottom, I clicked because I had high cholesterol, thought I needed to avoid foods high with cholesterol and high saturated fat. I'm so confused, have no clue what causes high cholesterol. That person's confusion should be genuine. That person should do their own research. That person should look more at what Nick has written about the cholesterol, the lipid energy model. They could also look at what Mike doesn't write anything. Mike doesn't have 2 brain cells to rub together, but they should look at what those doctors, Dr. Lipid and so on, write about the lipid heart hypothesis so that they can understand both sides of the story and maybe come to their own conclusion, right? For me, that if I were responding to that person's comment, what I would say is LDL in isolation tells us literally nothing. Tell us your triglycerides. If you want, tell us your ApoB. If you want, I don't care so much about that either. Tell us definitely your triglycerides. Tell us your HDL. Tell us your blood sugar, your fasting blood sugar. And also tell us your goals. I mean, are you a fit 20-year-old or are you an obese 70-year-old? Like there's different context for all this stuff, right?
Saying the average person will not see this. High LDL is causal to atherosclerosis, and then the pattern that virtually everybody that's watching these videos is eating, but I don't think he's going to do that. And that's because a large part of his niche, where he gets his views, is this keto high meat.
So he's just criticizing Nick for no reason right now. I'm going to stop it because it's just making me angry. What to say about Mike the Vegan? I mean, as I mentioned, he's not the smartest cookie. So apologies to him if he's not prepared for this kind of a discussion. But I think it is super important to understand that there are 2 competing hypotheses. They're compatible hypotheses, technically speaking, but to some extent they also are competing because this is just the diatribe stuff. To be honest, they are perfectly compatible, the 2 hypotheses. Let me restate them. The lipid energy model states that when a person is fat adapted, that is that they are primarily using triglycerides for energy and not glucose, not exclusively glucose. There's always some glucose in the body. The liver will always manufacture some glucose, even if you're not eating any carbohydrates. So when that person is primarily using fats for energy, the body will traffic those fats, will use those fats. When the person's fat density on the body goes down enough, now this is stuff I'm adding, it's not exactly stated like this, under certain circumstances that are unknown, let me state it a little bit more carefully, the need to traffic fats for energy becomes a bit higher, and the liver will compensate by producing more VLDLs. VLDLs are what will become LDLs in the longer term, right? Those VLDLs in that context are not necessarily atherogenic. Now, this is my addition, right? So that's the lipid energy model. In that context, in the context of VLDLs being manufactured for the purposes of trafficking energy as opposed to some other purpose, in a person who's not fat adapted, in a sugar burner, in the context of someone who's fat adapted, that is not necessarily atherogenic, right? And all the data that's come out from many different lines of experimentation is backing that up, backing that hypothesis up. Not necessarily. See how I'm stating it? Not saying that it's not atherogenic, not necessarily atherogenic, right? There could be other things going on. The person could have sickle cell disease. The person could be a smoker. Could be other things going on, which may mean that actually it is atherogenic, right? We don't know that, right? It's important to state that very carefully. The lipid heart hypothesis, on the other hand, states that ApoB containing lipoproteins, including LDL, are necessary but not sufficient for the creation of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, ASCVD. And a person's risk, one of the factors contributing to a person's risk is lifetime exposure to ApoB. Meaning that if your ApoB is very high, has been very high for a long time, like myself, I've had high ApoB pretty much my whole life. And since I've fixed my health, my ApoB has been through the roof, 400, 500, similar numbers to what Nick's were there, not quite as high, but pretty high. We would expect to see some damage if the lipid heart hypothesis had some validity. And so I've done my own cardiac testing. I've seen what's going on. I have a CAC score of 0. I don't have plaquing as far as I know, right? So in that context, there's a lot of data against the lipid heart hypothesis as being applicable in all circumstances. But just because it's not applicable in all circumstances doesn't mean it might not be applicable in some circumstance. But it's definitely not the only thing going on. And I think we know that when we look and we see markers like smoking status, like blood pressure, like diabetes status. If you're diabetic, your risk of all these things goes up tenfold. So when you see those kind of markers, when you see those kind of RRs, so that's an RR of 10. I said a minimum of RR in order to prove interest, in order to be a marker of interest, is like 2. So this is an RR of 10 for diabetes. So when you're at that level of increased incidence, then causation becomes a thing. Like above 6, it's very hard to say it's not causal. So diabetes seems to be causal as far as we can tell, right? Blood pressure, I don't think blood pressure crosses the 6 threshold, but it's still pretty high. It's still pretty close to causal, right? LDL, very low. 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, depends on the study. So anyway, these are some thoughts. Hopefully I didn't lose my temper too much at Mike the Vegan. It's a challenge for me watching his videos. Hope you liked it. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.